Across the world, hidden behind headlines and diplomatic silence, entire nations are quietly falling apart. Not from war alone, but from something far more disturbing: internal collapse. Economies are crumbling, governments are vanishing, and millions are being plunged into chaos as currencies lose value, food disappears, and law and order disintegrate. These aren't distant, forgotten corners of the planet. They're modern societies unraveling in real time. How did once stable nations reach the brink? And could the same fate await others? What you're about to see isn't just a warning. It's a glimpse into what happens when a country begins to die from within. Starting at number 10, we have Sri Lanka. Once known as a tropical paradise, Sri Lanka is now a cautionary tale of economic collapse. In 2022, the island nation faced its worst financial crisis since independence. The country defaulted on its debt for the first time in history. Why? A deadly combination of unsustainable borrowing, a crippled tourism sector post-COVID, and misguided agricultural policies. The Rajapaksa government banned chemical fertilizers overnight, plunging crop yields by over 40% and forcing the country to import food it could no longer afford. At its peak, inflation in Sri Lanka soared above 70%, making daily necessities like milk, rice, and fuel almost unaffordable. The currency, the Sri Lankan rupee, lost over 80% of its value in less than a year. Protesters stormed the presidential palace in July 2022, forcing President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to flee the country. Hospitals ran out of medicine. Power outages became the norm. Even schools shut down due to lack of fuel. Today, Sri Lanka is surviving on a $2.9 billion IMF bailout, but recovery is painfully slow. Nearly half the population is struggling to meet basic food needs. Unemployment remains high, and foreign investors have fled. Sri Lanka's collapse wasn't sudden. It was a slow, avoidable burn made worse by corruption, poor leadership, and global instability. It's a warning sign for other fragile economies and a stark reminder that no nation is immune from collapse when leadership fails. Number 9, Pakistan. Pakistan is teetering on the edge of a full-blown economic and political collapse, and the world is watching closely because this isn't just any country. This is a nuclear-armed nation of over 240 million people, with one of the largest armies in the world. Yet today, its government is barely functioning, inflation is skyrocketing, and the people are drowning in uncertainty. In 2023, inflation hit an all-time high of 38%, pushing food and fuel prices beyond the reach of the average citizen. The Pakistani rupee has plummeted, losing nearly 50% of its value in a single year. Power outages have become a daily occurrence, often lasting 8 to 12 hours in major cities. And in rural areas, it's even worse. Meanwhile, the political system is in chaos. Former Prime Minister Imran Khan was ousted, arrested, and then released, sparking nationwide protests and violent clashes between his supporters and the military. The army, which has long controlled much of Pakistan behind the scenes, is losing public trust, and that's dangerous in a country with such a fragile democracy. Pakistan narrowly avoided default in 2023 thanks to a $3 billion IMF bailout, but that money barely scratched the surface. Its foreign reserves at one point fell below $4 billion, barely enough to cover 1 month's worth of imports. The most alarming part? The country's nuclear weapons sit in the background of this chaos. If Pakistan falls further, the consequences won't be limited to South Asia. They'll ripple across the globe. This is a nation in free fall, and no one knows how or when or if it'll stop. Number 8, Lebanon. Once known as the Switzerland of the Middle East, Lebanon has now become one of the most financially devastated countries in the world. In just a few short years, Lebanon went from being a booming banking hub to a country where people can't even withdraw their own money from the bank. The economy has imploded, the currency has collapsed, and basic services are barely functioning. Lebanon's financial crisis began in 2019, when decades of corruption, sectarian politics, and unsustainable borrowing came to a head. The Lebanese pound has lost over 98% of its value since the crisis began. Banks imposed strict limits on withdrawals, essentially locking ordinary citizens out of their own life savings. And in a stunning turn, some desperate citizens even began robbing banks with fake guns. not to steal, but to access their own funds. Electricity in Lebanon is available for just a few hours a day, forcing people to rely on expensive and unreliable generators. Fuel shortages are rampant. Inflation has pushed over 80% of the population below the poverty line, and the middle class has all but disappeared. The 2020 Beirut port explosion, one of the largest non-nuclear blasts in history, only made things worse, killing over 200 people and destroying billions in infrastructure. Years later, no one has been held accountable. The government is virtually paralyzed. Public services are crumbling. Doctors and professionals have fled en masse. Today, Lebanon isn't just facing a financial collapse. It's facing a collapse of hope, of trust, and of the very idea of a functioning state. Number 7. Haiti. Haiti is in a state of collapse so severe, it barely qualifies as a functioning nation anymore. Once the first Black republic to win independence, Haiti today is ruled not by a government, but by gangs. Over 60% of the capital, Port-au-Prince, is now controlled by armed groups who rob, kidnap, rape, and kill at will. The police are outnumbered, outgunned, and, in many cases, completely absent. Since the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021, Haiti has had no elected president, no parliament, and virtually no national leadership. The country has become what some experts now call a de facto failed state. Haiti's economy has also cratered. Over 4.7 million Haitians face acute hunger. Inflation has soared past 40%, and the national currency continues to weaken. Fuel shortages are constant, with fuel depots under gang control. Hospitals can't operate. Schools have shut down, and cholera has returned, killing hundreds. The UN has warned that Haiti is experiencing one of the worst humanitarian crises in the Western Hemisphere, but international aid efforts are blocked by violence and lawlessness. Even the UN has been reluctant to send peacekeepers back, fearing a repeat of past missions that ended in disaster and scandal. Haiti is now trapped in a vicious cycle. Gang control prevents stabilization, while the lack of stability allows gangs to grow stronger. There are no simple solutions, and for the 11 million people living there, daily life has become a battle for survival. Number 6. Venezuela. At one time, Venezuela was the richest country in South America, blessed with the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Today, it's a country where people dig through garbage for food, hospitals operate without basic supplies, and over 7 million citizens have fled in search of a better life. Venezuela's collapse began in the early 2010s under the rule of Hugo Chavez and deepened under Nicolas Maduro. Populist policies, nationalization of industries, and the mismanagement of oil revenue combined with plummeting crude prices to send the economy into freefall. By 2018, inflation reached a staggering 1,700,000%, and the Venezuelan bolivar became worthless. People started weighing cash instead of counting it. At the peak of the crisis, a cup of coffee cost more than a month's salary. Power outages became common, basic medicine disappeared, and malnutrition spread among children. Even with oil prices recovering, Venezuela has struggled to bounce back due to U.S. sanctions, corruption, and a destroyed industrial base. The government controls media, jails dissidents, and violently suppresses protests. In 2019, opposition leader Juan Guaido briefly declared himself interim president, backed by the U.S. and dozens of nations, but Maduro remained in power, propped up by military loyalty and foreign allies like Russia and Iran. Today, while the government claims the economy is stabilizing, life for ordinary Venezuelans remains bleak. Blackouts, food shortages, and rampant crime continue. Venezuela's collapse was not just economic, it was political, institutional, and deeply human. Number 5. Sudan. In 2023, Sudan spiraled into a brutal civil war between two rival generals, and the country has not recovered. What began as a political power struggle between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces has turned into a full-scale conflict that has killed thousands and displaced millions. The capital, Khartoum, became a war zone. Families fled on foot. Hospitals were bombed. Electricity and water supplies were cut. More than 7 million people are now internally displaced, and another 1.5 million have fled the country altogether. It's one of the world's fastest-growing humanitarian disasters, yet it receives little global attention. Sudan has a long history of instability. The 30-year rule of Omar al-Bashir ended in 2019, sparking hopes of democracy. But that dream collapsed when the military seized power again in 2021. The 2023 war crushed any remaining hope. Civilians are caught between two ruthless factions, both accused of war crimes and atrocities. Meanwhile, the economy has collapsed. Inflation is rampant. Infrastructure is destroyed. Aid workers have been killed or forced to evacuate. In some regions, starvation is looming as crops fail and markets shut down. Sudan is now not only a humanitarian crisis, but a warning sign of what happens when international peace deals collapse and when power-hungry factions are left unchecked. Number 4. Myanmar. In February 2021, Myanmar's fragile democracy was crushed overnight when the military staged a coup, arresting elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi and seizing control. What followed has been a descent into chaos. Mass protests, brutal crackdowns, internet blackouts, and a growing civil war that's pulling the entire country apart. More than 3,000 civilians have been killed in protests and military raids. Over 20,000 political prisoners are behind bars. The military junta uses airstrikes against ethnic rebel groups and civilian villages alike. Entire communities have been burned to the ground. The economy has collapsed under the weight of sanctions, investor flight, and internal instability. Poverty has doubled. Food insecurity is rising. Banks barely function, and the local currency, the kyat, has lost massive value. Foreign companies like Telenor and Total Energies have exited entirely, citing human rights concerns and operational risk. Myanmar is now in open rebellion. Resistance forces, made up of ethnic militias and newly formed People's Defense Forces, are waging guerrilla war against the military. The country is on track for a long-term civil conflict that could last years. International responses have been weak, partly due to geopolitical complexities. Myanmar is backed by China and Russia, who block UN action. For the 55 million people living in the country, daily life is full of fear, scarcity, and uncertainty. What began as a power grab has turned into a nationwide collapse. Number 3. Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe once stood as a prosperous country in southern Africa, with a thriving economy and agricultural sector. But by the late 2000s, hyperinflation turned the nation into a cautionary tale. At its worst in 2008, Zimbabwe's inflation rate reached an astronomical 79.6 billion%. The Zimbabwean dollar became completely worthless, and people had to use wheelbarrows full of notes to buy a loaf of bread. The country's economic disaster began under the leadership of Robert Mugabe, who pursued a policy of land reform that seized white-owned commercial farms without compensation. This led to a collapse in agricultural production and widespread poverty. As Mugabe's government printed money to finance its unsustainable spending, the value of the currency plummeted. The economy hasn't recovered. The government abandoned the Zimbabwean dollar in 2009, switching to a basket of foreign currencies, but economic growth remains sluggish. Unemployment is sky-high, and corruption runs rampant. The healthcare and education systems are in disarray, and many Zimbabweans have fled the country in search of work abroad. Today, despite a new government under Emerson Mnangagwa, the legacy of hyperinflation and poor governance still haunts Zimbabwe. Foreign investment is scarce, and the country remains trapped in poverty. It's a nation where dreams of prosperity have turned into a survivalist struggle for millions. Number 2. Afghanistan. Afghanistan's fall back into the hands of the Taliban in 2021 signaled the dramatic collapse of a fragile state that had been rebuilt with the help of billions of dollars and decades of international involvement. Just months after the U.S. withdrawal, Afghanistan's economic and social fabric began to disintegrate. The withdrawal of foreign aid, which had constituted around 75% of the country's government budget, left the nation on the brink of total collapse. Banks froze, causing a cash shortage. Inflation soared, especially on food items, which led to widespread hunger. The country's education system has been devastated, with girls barred from secondary school in many areas, and many women are now forced out of the workforce. Poverty and unemployment rates skyrocketed as the country slid back into a deeply conservative, authoritarian state. The Taliban's return has isolated Afghanistan from the international community. The country is now a haven for terrorist groups and drug cartels. In 2023, over half the population was living in extreme poverty. The Taliban's grip on power is tenuous at best, and the world wonders just how long it will take before Afghanistan implodes in on itself once again. And finally, at number 1, we have Ukraine. Ukraine's path to collapse is one marked by a brutal war, external aggression, and an ongoing battle for survival. In 2022, Russia's invasion of Ukraine plunged the country into an all-out war that has led to tens of thousands of casualties, millions displaced, and widespread destruction across the country. Ukrainian cities like Mariupol and Kharkiv have been reduced to rubble, and the economic toll has been devastating. Before the war, Ukraine was already struggling with corruption, economic stagnation, and political instability. But the full-scale invasion by Russia changed everything. The government, led by President Volodymyr Zelensky, has put up a heroic resistance, but the war has crippled infrastructure, decimated the economy, and displaced millions. The GDP plummeted by over 30%, and inflation surged. The cost of rebuilding the country after the war is estimated to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Western aid, military support, and international sanctions on Russia have kept Ukraine afloat, but the war is far from over, and the future is uncertain. With millions of Ukrainians fleeing to neighboring countries, the crisis has become one of the most severe humanitarian disasters in Europe since World War II. Ukraine's collapse isn't just an economic disaster. It's a geopolitical crisis that could reverberate across Europe and the world. The war may have only begun, but the toll of this conflict is already immeasurable. In the face of Russian aggression, Ukraine stands as a nation in peril, and its survival remains uncertain as the war continues to reshape the region. These stories aren't just about collapse, they're warnings. No country is too safe to fail, and the signs often appear long before anyone notices. What happened to them could happen anywhere. If you found this eye-opening, make sure to like, subscribe to Top 10 Trips, and comment below. Which country shocked you the most? And which one do you think could be next? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.